We all have those great family stories that we tell about our cute little kids. We have one about our youngest, Taryn. One time she was over visiting my mother, and my mom really wanted a dog. By the way, she has a dog now, but at the time she wanted one so badly, and Taryn said, "Why don't you just get a dog?" To which my mother replied, "If I get a dog, no more grandpa," because my dad really didn't want a dog. Taryn's response was insightful. She looked up at my mother and said, "No more bossing around." She saw how marriage worked, just very young child there. We don't like being bossed around, do we? We want to be the boss. Well, you might think of the imperative mood as the mood of bossing around. It's the mood of command. It's what we use when we want to tell someone what to do. The Greek imperative is very much like the English imperative, except that Greek has two great additions. The first addition that Greek adds to the imperative, and this will blow your mind just a little bit, there's actually a third person imperative in Greek. Now in English, if I command, the implied subject is always you, second person. If I say, "Listen up," or "Clean your room," or "Study," or whatever I command, it's always directed at you, singular or plural, right? But in Greek, there's a way to say, "Let him do something." And actually, there's no good way to translate this. An example in the New Testament that's fairly common is when Jesus says, "He who has ears to hear," what? "Let him hear." Akuato is the Greek, but it doesn't, "let him hear" is kind of a hortatory subjunctive, actually. There is no good way to translate that into English, but probably it would be better just to say, "He who has ears to hear, hear," right? So it's a third person. Let him, let her, let it hear. And yet it's an imperative. So the third person imperative is something Greek has that English just doesn't. The second addition that Greek brings to the imperative mood is the addition of ongoing aspect. Now let me explain that. In English, if we command something, it's always undefined aspect. If I say study, you don't know if I'm asking you to study all day, study continuously, just to study once. It's undefined, right? Now in Greek, if I want to say something in undefined aspect, what tense do I use? Aorist, right? Yes, okay, so we would use the aorist. Now normally in the indicative, the aorist is in past time, but remember, once we get out of the indicative mood, time has nothing to do with it. So if I want to command something in Greek and just leave it undefined aspect, I command it using the aorist tense. Now, what's really cool about Greek is that I can also command something using the present tense. And we've seen that the present tense can have this ongoing aspect. And indeed, in the subjunctive, it always has the ongoing aspect. So if I command you to study in Greek using the present tense, I'm not just telling you do it in an undefined way. I'm telling you enter into that as a continuous action of studying. So speaking of studying, let's do it. Let's study these imperatives. Well, let's look at how the Greeks made imperatives. And as usual, we'll see it's a very elegant solution here, okay? So if you just take a look at the chart here, remember we only have present tense and aorist tense, so that's all we need to worry about. And notice that in the active voice, most of them are to, te, tosan, to, te, tosan. So in the active voice. Over here in the middle passive voice, notice that the endings are sto, sthe, stosan, sto, sthe, stosan. Okay, and in the aorist passive, we have this theta eta with the to, te, tosan. But that's easy to remember that's a passive because the theta eta tells you, hey, I'm an aorist passive, right? That's our big clue for the aorist passive. So if you'll just get in your head to, te, tosan, sto, sthe, stosan, you will recognize most of the imperatives when you come across them. Now you can see these oddballs in the blue here. We just have to learn those. Those are the second person singular forms. So in the second person singular present active, it's lua, meaning you loose, loose, okay? And in English, notice we just translate it loose, or whether it's plural, you loose, okay? And like we've said, we really have no way to translate the third person imperative. So we do our best and just say, let him loose. Or in the plural, let them loose. So lueto means let him loose. And lueto-san means let them loose. Lue means loose, okay, or, you loose, okay? So you're following, hopefully, these endings, but notice again that the second person singular endings are, you just have to recognize them. In the aorist, it's on, so it's luson. At least we get our sigma there to help us out a little bit, but on is the ending, so that's the aorist active. Notice the translation is identical. In English, we don't have a way to distinguish between a present imperative, lue, and an aorist imperative, luson. We just translate them both loose, okay? You loose, which we don't capture that ongoing aspect, which again is one of the nice things about the Greek here. All right, let's look at the middle passive here and notice that in the second person singular we have another odd ending, luu. You be loosed if it's passive, or loose for yourself if it's middle. And then in the aorist we have psi in the middle, and the translation would be the same as the middle present. Obviously the aspect would be different again, but we just aren't able to capture that in English. And then in the aorist passive we have our theta eta. We have, though, for the second person singular, te is the ending, lutheti. So te for the ending. So you got to kind of get used to seeing those blue ones. Understand those are the second person singular commands. But again, if you'll just get this in your head, to, te, tosan for the actives, and stho, sthe, sthosan for the middle passives, and then use the clues we already know. Sigma alpha tells you it's aorist, right? Or in the aorist passive, theta eta. So that sigma alpha's here, right? Jumping out at you. And in the active, things aren't changed, just as we would expect. I'm sorry, I said the active. I meant in the present. In the present tense, that things don't change. It's in the aorist that we indicate aorist with sigma alpha. Now, of course, what is a second aorist? It doesn't use sigma alpha to tell you it's aorist. It uses a stem change. So the second aorist will use a stem change, and they'll wind up looking exactly like the present tense imperatives. But they're not present, and how do we know that? Because of the stem change. Get that one stuck in your head. Second aorist means stem change, and the stem change tells you I'm aorist. So, and then in the aorist passive, we've seen before that sometimes these passives will drop the theta. That's all that means, is that a second aorist passive doesn't use a theta. Don't get too hung up about those. They're not that common. To the wild we go again. And isn't it great? The more we learn, the more we can see when we go to the jungle. So here we have Jesus crying out, saying, "Eon." And by the way, when I say "on," I hope you see that "on," and it makes you think what? Where's the subjunctive, right? Subjunctive coming up, and sure enough, here it is. Dipsa, which means from dipsao, it means if anyone is thirsty. Eon tis, thirsty, or thirsts, aorist, right? Because see the sigma hidden in the psi. Okay, but I'm getting distracted. If anyone's thirsty, okay, here are our imperatives. Erchesto, let him come, prosme, to me, kai, peneto. And I think you could guess what peneto is just from the context. Peno means I drink. Now, do you see the endings? Sthos, thes, thosan, to, tes, to, tes, tosan. There we go. Here's our stho, and here's our to. Okay. So if anyone is thirsty, let him come is how we translate this. Now, wait a minute. Why are we translating this actively when that is a middle passive ending? I'll bet you know. Erchamai, when we look that thing up, remember, is a deponent verb. So erchomai, even though it's middle passive in form here, it's active in meaning. And notice that this stem hasn't changed. So what tense are we looking at here? Present tense, right? Yeah, present. So if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me, kai peneto, from peno. Let him drink. But also, notice no sigma alpha, no stem change, also present. So kind of cool here. What Jesus is saying is not just do it, but he's communicating a state of being that we are to enter into. Let him keep on coming to me and let him keep on drinking if you want. Here is a great example of a second person singular imperative. And to set the scene here, this is when they have Jesus in the garden and Peter's gonna fight for Jesus, so he draws his sword. Okay. Apen, he said, therefore, ha Jesus, Jesus, of course, to Petro, I hope you recognize datives there and you're using the keyword to. So how would we translate this phrase? Therefore, Jesus said to Peter, what did he say? Bale tein machairon eis tein thechein. Now I realize that's vocabulary you don't know, but machairon is sword and thechein is sheath. So you can see it means grave too, but sheath. Okay, so put the sword in the sheath. Okay, balo, we remember this one, to cast or to place. Okay, but so okay, what kind of an imperative is this right here? Do you recognize this ending? Remember that the second person singular endings are fairly common and they are unusual. Well, this should help you out here. Okay, so it's an imperative. It's a second person singular, so it's you put, okay? But what, is this a present or is it an aorist? And remember, that's the only thing you need to ask about imperatives. Present or aorist. You don't need to worry about future or perfect or anything else. Is it present or is it aorist? What do you say? What do you say? What's your vote? Do you recognize the stem change there? If it was a double lambda, it would be present, but it's not. It's an aorist. It's a second aorist. And, actually, if you think about it, that makes sense. Jesus wouldn't tell Peter, keep on putting your sword back in your sheath or something like that. It's a point. Do this, right? Put your sword in the sheath. Bala tein machairon, eis tein thechein. Now, you might have noticed something here, that the second person plural endings of the imperative are the same for the indicative. Eta, right? To, tet, tosens, thoses, thosen. So when you put on the connecting vowels and everything, it winds up looking just the same. So pistueta here could mean you believe, or it could also mean as a command, believe, right? Okay, well, let's look. How will you tell the difference? Well, it will have to be context, because in the second person plural, the forms are the same for the indicative and the imperative. Well, let's look at the context here. This one's quite clear. Agapetoi, beloved. Me, remember that's the negator for the non-indicative. Oh, there's our clue right there. Don't panti, pneumati, don't in every spirit pistueta, believe. Now we know that that's an imperative from the context. He's addressing them, brothers, or beloved, I should say. Don't believe every spirit. It could be, I suppose, indicative if he were just saying, beloved, you don't believe every spirit, but because it's being prohibited here with may and not u, we know it can't be indicative. Remember, u is used to modify or to describe the indicative, and may is used to negate all the other moods and all the other parts of speech. So, beloved, don't believe every spirit, but, strong but here we go, here's another one right here, dakamadzeta, from dakamadzo, and I think you could figure out that this is also a second person plural imperative. And are these present or are they aorist. Clearly present, aren't they? Because no stem change at all. So these are present active imperatives, second person plural, and it's saying don't keep on believing every spirit. Keep on testing the spirits, okay? So there we have that nice present tense nuance in the imperative that we lose in English. One last verse to look at here. In John 14:1, there are actually 3 possible imperatives here. Probably they are all imperatives. But okay, this is a familiar passage, right, where Jesus is about to die, often read at funerals, but don't let your heart be troubled, believe in God, believe also in me. Well, okay, let's look at this. Me tarasesto. Well, there's a word we don't know, but if we look up tarasso, we find out that it means be shaken, stirred up, troubled, okay? Me tarasesto, do you see this ending is middle or passive, and in this case, clearly passive? He's not saying don't trouble your hearts, he's saying don't let your heart be troubled. The subject is receiving the action of the verb here. Do not let it be troubled of you, the heart. Okay? Me tarasesto, do not let it be troubled, your, or of y'all, he cardia, the heart. Don't let your heart be troubled. Now, we know that this is imperative because of what? Because it's negated here, not by u, which would be used for the indicative, but may. So we know it's may, it's a command. Don't let your heart be troubled. Now, this one, though, is not quite as certain. It's almost always translated as an imperative, but it could just as well be an indicative. Remember, pistuo, I believe, so pistuete, Jesus could be saying, don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, that would be indicative, and then perhaps a command. And in me believe, also in me believe. So this could be indicative or imperative. Jesus could be saying, don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. That's translating this as an imperative. Also is the kai here. Also, eis eme, and notice that's emphatic. In me, the makes the me emphatic. Also, in me, believe. Now, that could be indicative too. I mean, it's possible that he's saying, you believe in God and you also believe in me. Okay, that would be indicative. Or it could be both imperative. You see what I'm saying? Don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. And probably that's correct. But you can see that the form there is open to interpretation. So again, in the second person plural, there is this sort of unfortunate confusion because sometimes we're not sure if we're looking at an indicative or an imperative, and only the context can help us figure that out. So take courage, or to put it in the third person, if anyone is growing weary, let him take courage, or let her take courage, right? Third person imperative. Now I realize as we go through this and hit a topic after topic, wave after wave, that you may be a little bowled over by all of this information about the Greek verb. Let me remind you and encourage you that we're just laying a foundation. And I hope that you're seeing that as we go along, there are a lot of things that once we start reading Greek, that will pop out at us in really spectacular ways. It's sort of like, I remember when we were laying the foundation of the house, we would walk around and say, oh, here's where the bedroom will be, or this, I can see what that's going to be when it grows all up. So as we're learning all this foundational stuff about Greek, don't forget, we will build on this, and all of this stuff will come together when we get into some texts and start really trying to read. So, foundation work. Take courage.